the genres of the epistle, and we're just about to finish gospel narrative. And then next week we'll be looking at parables, followed by Acts, and then Revelation. And then we're going to shift over to the Old Testament and do the same thing through a number of genres there. But we are looking at gospel narrative today. And for the individual practical application this week, we had three parallel passages from the book of Mark. And so we're going to take a look at those and just try to think through them, try to unpack them, and hopefully make application in a way that is helpful as we move forward. Okay, so let's start with reading the passages. And if you've done the work and got ahead on this, good. Give yourself a pat on the back, and you will definitely be greater blessed as a result of that. If not, that's okay. We're gonna work through this together. But we'll start with Mark chapter 8, verses 31 through 38. So this is right after Peter's great confession. Verse 31. And he, Jesus, began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's. And he summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Okay, so that's the first section we'll look at. And there we see in just initial observations, we have the breakdown of Jesus talking about what he's going to suffer. The disciples are on a different channel entirely, and then Jesus provides teaching. Okay, well, if you turn over a page, we come to chapter 9, we'll look at verses 30 through 37. From there they went out and began to go through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know about it, for he was teaching his disciples and telling them, The Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. But they did not understand the statement, and they were afraid to ask him. They came to Capernaum, and while he was in the house, he began to question them, What were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent, for on the way they had discussed with one another which of them was the greatest. Sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, If anyone wants to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. Taking a child, he set him before them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, Whoever receives one child like this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me does not receive me, but him who sent me. Okay, so if you're looking at that, you'll notice again, there's a little bit of a parallel there. So we have Jesus talking about what he's going to suffer. The disciples are on another channel entirely, and Jesus provides teaching. Well, we come to the next section, the last section, chapter 10, verses 32 through 45. We're going to see the same pattern unfold. They were on the road walking up to Jerusalem. And Jesus was walking on ahead of them, and they were amazed, and those who followed were fearful. And again, he took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him, saying, Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit on him and scourge him and kill him, and 3 days later he will rise again. James and John, the two sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus, saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Grant that we may sit, one on your right and one on your left, in your glory. But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you shall drink, and you shall be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized. But to sit on my right or my left, this is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." Hearing this, the 10 began to feel indignant with James and John. So calling them to himself, Jesus said to them, "You know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. But it is not this way among you. But whoever wishes to be great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." Okay. So there again, we see the same pattern unfold yet again. We see Jesus describing in detail what's going to happen to him. We see the disciples on a different channel entirely, and then we see Jesus provide teaching. So 3 times we see that. And that's why we're going through a little bit more material than typical this lesson, because we're drawing a point with the parallels. Okay, so those are the passages. And with the questions we have on the notes, let's go ahead and just start walking through some of them. And some of them we'll spend a little bit more time on than others, but let's start with the first one. So we're talking about the book of Mark. So what's the provenance? Who's the author? What's the audience? What's the location? Maybe approximate date, situation. What information do we have there?
Author's John Mark.
Okay, and just to flesh that out, who is John Mark?
He was one of the people that prepared the upper room for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he's been tied in with the disciples for a while. We know later in Acts, he was the one who said, "Guys, I've had enough," and then leaves Paul. We know later he was restored. Later he's faithful. Later Paul says, "This man is useful to me." And oh, by the way, he's the one who wrote the book of Mark. He writes the book of Mark under Peter. Anybody know the location? This is actually a little bit significant to how the book is constructed. Anybody know where it was? The book of Mark was written while he was under Peter in Rome. And probably as an effect of that, what you have, whereas Matthew has very, let's go through the details, here's an extensive discourse, and you have those 5 narrative discourse patterns. Mark trims that down significantly. And he uses the term immediately quite a bit. So it's a very fast-paced gospel narrative, which is in keeping with, here's Romans. Romans are not Jews. Romans don't really care about all the Jewish traditions and prophecies and everything. It's more, okay, here's the facts as he walks through. The date, probably late 60s AD. And so, you know, we have the question, which isn't really relevant to our discussion here. You know, was Mark borrowing from Matthew? Was Matthew borrowing from Mark? We talked about how most scholars believe Matthew was borrowing from Mark. I actually believe Mark was borrowing from Matthew, but we'll find out when we get to eternity. So when we look at these 3 passages, what is the scope and context of the literary unit involved? When we look at these 3 passages, they're clearly linked because they all follow the exact same pattern, but what's the broader literary unit that we're dealing with? So we can start with chapter 8. And if anybody took a look and wants to take a guess on this, just go ahead and shout out an observation. But if we go back, I'm going to make the argument that it actually starts in chapter 8, verse 1, and it goes all the way through chapter 10. Now, you could make a little bit different arguments, but here's why. Chapter 8, verse 1, we have the feeding of the 4,000. Jesus miraculously provides food for the 4,000. chapter 8, verse 14, we have the disciples who had forgotten to take bread, and they start misinterpreting what Jesus is teaching them. Jesus says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, and the disciples go, whoa, this is because we forgot to pack bread. Whose fault was this? And Jesus then clarifies, you guys don't understand. Do you not see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Do you not remember when I broke up the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets of broken pieces you brought, you picked up? When I fed the 4,000, how many baskets did we receive? And do you not understand? So here's the disciples who are experiencing Jesus and not understanding. And then we have this story, the unique healing of the blind man, where Jesus finds this blind man. He asks Jesus to touch him and make him whole. So he takes the blind man out, spits on his eyes, lays his hands on him, says, do you see anything? And he says, I see men like trees walking, maybe the idea of men like behind trees or carrying wood for fire or something like that. It's just very fuzzy, very odd. Jesus puts his hands on him and restores his eyes, and he sees everything clearly. We've talked about this, and I forget which lesson it was, but I think it was when we were talking about literary units. But this is intentional. This is not somehow Jesus was having a bad day and just couldn't heal completely. He's doing this to make a point. Puts his hands on Jesus puts his hands on the blind man, partial healing. So he sees, but not clearly. And then Jesus touches him again, and now he sees clearly, which is exactly what happened in chapter 8. They see, okay, Jesus can make magical bread, but they don't see clearly. And then for the next 2.5 chapters, we see this pattern of the disciples see, but not clearly. The disciples see, but not clearly. The disciples see, but not clearly. And we see that all the way through. We see Peter's confession of Christ. You are the Christ. Okay, they see. Yes, and the Christ must be crucified. Oh, no, Jesus. That's not going to happen. So they don't see clearly. They have the transfiguration. They see Jesus in his glory. So they see him. Peter doesn't quite understand what to do. And so he says, how about we build booths for the 3 of you? He doesn't see clearly. They come down. There's this demon-possessed young man. So they see what he needs, but they cannot cast him out. Jesus tells them this kind cannot come out by anything but prayer. So they see, but they don't see clearly. Next section we read about, Son of Man is going to be killed and rise again. They don't understand. They're worried about who's the greatest. So they see, but they don't see clearly. Jesus, in chapter 10, we're going to skip down a little bit. Rich young ruler. If you don't give up everything and follow me, you're not going to have treasure in heaven. Jesus says, how hard is it for those who are wealthy to enter the kingdom of heaven? And the disciples go, who can be saved? With men, it is impossible. With God, all things are possible. Great. The disciples see. Do they see clearly? No. Peter immediately responds with, Lord, we've left everything. So what do we get? And then Jesus teaches. They don't see clearly. And then we have the last section in chapter 10, where, again, Jesus says, this is what's going to happen to me. I'm going to be turned over. I'm going to be killed. They see it, but they don't see clearly. Okay, can I be on your left hand and your right hand when you come into the glorious kingdom, please? Please, oh, please, oh, please. They don't see clearly. And then that section ends with, what do we have in verse 46? Blind Bartimaeus, another blind man. What happens to him? He recognizes who Jesus is. He's the son of David. And what happens to him? There's no partial healing. He's healed. Now he sees clearly. So this is setting up a trajectory for the disciples who see but don't see clearly. But there's tacitly and structurally the teaching here. The disciples are going to be able to see, similar to how Bartimaeus saw. And of course, we know by the time we get to the end of the book, they're seeing a lot more clearly. So that's the scope of the literary unit involved, and that's what those three accounts are embedded in. And so then we're not surprised when we see disciples are seeing, but not seeing clearly. Next question, are there major translational differences at any point in the passage? I'm just going to cut to the chase. Not really. What are key terms required to understand the passage? Again, you can make arguments that there are words here and there that would be a little bit, that would be helpful in some way to understand and maybe flesh out the passage a little bit. But there's nothing there where the interpretation of the passage pivots on a critical text that's disputed or disagreed on by translations. Okay, so the next question, what is the text communicating in the narrative? And that's, again, where we want to ask questions of the text, and that's where we want to pay close attention to detail. So we'll start with chapter 8, starting in verse 31. And here's where we interact a little bit. What are some things that the text communicates? What are some ideas, some thoughts? It doesn't have to be real well developed, but just some observations from chapter 8, verses 31 through 38.
I think he was trying to teach them to trust him and to not be all about themselves.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, they're very, very focused on themselves. Jesus is addressing that, so good. What else?
Well, he pretty clearly says, I'm going to die and I'm going to be resurrected on the third day.
Yeah, Jesus is really clear. And actually, this is one of the things that's interesting as you take all three of those accounts we read and you put them side by side. Jesus gets explicitly, progressively more and more clear and more detailed with what's going to happen to him. The disciples, on the other hand, get progressively more and more ambitious. And then in the last section, when Jesus provides teaching, the teaching gets more and more explicit through all three of these. So, for instance, Jesus initially says that the Son of Man is going to be rejected and be killed, and 3 days later rise again. In chapter 9, he says the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. And then he says twice, they will kill him, and when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days again, or 3 days later. So there's an emphasis on, I am going to be killed. You come to the third one, and he's very explicit. He says, the Son of Man is going to be delivered to the chief priests, the scribes. They will condemn him to death. They will hand him over to the Gentiles, which for a Jew would be horrifying, because if you're turned over to the Gentiles, how do they execute Jews at that time? It's crucifixion. And 3 days later, he will rise again. So Jesus is getting more and more explicit. The disciples get more and more ambitious. In the first one, Peter just says, Jesus, you don't need to be talking like that. Power of positive thinking. You need to put you're the Messiah. Don't worry about that. Second section, more than that, they are now interested in who is the greatest. It's not, hey, we're trying to protect you, Jesus. It's, wait, who of us is going to be the greatest? We come to the third one. Here we have James and John saying, can we please be the greatest? And then when Jesus is teaching, at the end, Jesus teaches them first time through, if you want to come after me, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Okay, so I need to give up my life in order to follow Jesus. First teaching. Second teaching, not only that, verse 35, if anyone wants to be first, he has to be last and the servant of all. The word underlying that, diakonos, where we get our word deacon, someone who serves. Okay, so it's not just enough to die to self and follow Jesus. It's not like we're going, okay, I don't care about you losers. I'm just going to follow Jesus by myself. No, rather, what do you have to do? You have to serve everybody. You have to be a servant of all. Well, then we come to chapter 10, and he says, yeah, the Gentiles lord it over them. Great men exercise authority. Great men are interested in what they can get for themselves. but it is not this way among you. Whoever wants to be great among you shall be your servant. That's the same word, diakonos, deacon, servant, one who serves. Verse 44, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be slave, doulos. The idea of somebody who is owned by another, who has no will of his own, who does what the master commands him to do. So the teaching gets more and more explicit as we go across all three. Going back to chapter 8, any other observations there? There's a few more, but take a look, take a minute. What's some other observations? Ask questions of the text. Why didn't the disciples understand? What does it mean to lose one's life for the gospel?
I think most people can use the term cross. I have a cross to bear.
Mm-hmm.
We miss the point. Passage will speak to the fact that mind itself.
Yeah.
And you say, Christ says servant, as opposed to simply having a hard life.
Mm-hmm.
Have to bear the cross.
Yeah. So that hits on what does it mean to take up your cross and follow Jesus? Does that mean I just have chronic sickness, or I have some sort of albatross around my neck that I've got to carry through life, and that's my cross to bear? Is that what Jesus is talking about? Clearly not. A little bit more on that in a second. But what else? Any other observations? Let's think about it. Why did the disciples not understand? Why? Well, what does Jesus say in verse 33? Why does Peter not understand? And by proxy, the disciples.
Not setting his mind on things of God, that again, as is usual for all of them, they're thinking about man, themselves, their own interpretation of the past and where they're going and why Christ is there.
Mm-hmm.
They're all in their own heads.
Okay.
They're not in a learning mode.
Good. Yeah, they're very focused on the interests of man. What are men interested in? They're interested in power, positions, advancement, money. Those are all the things that great people have, right? We see Herod. He has all these things. We want to be great too, like Herod. So we want to have all these things like Herod. Their mind is on the things of man, not the things of God. Which means when Jesus is teaching them about things of God, they're going to misunderstand.
And was there not also an aspect where God hasn't given them the ability to fully grasp, fully understand? Was it actually after Christ is risen, when they just needed they needed to hear all this teaching? But I mean, until God had opened their eyes fully, they can't understand. Yeah,
and that's another critical part of what's going on here. So we could say, on one level, what's happening, their mind is on the things of man instead of the things of God. Flip the coin over. Why is their mind on the things of man instead of the things of God? And there's an aspect in which God has not revealed that to them. And that's demonstrated then by them being focused on the things of man instead of the things of God. And so when we take that and we start thinking about, okay, so this person that I'm ministering to, or even in my own life, as I'm looking and I'm cold towards this particular doctrine or this particular teaching, or I'm ministering to somebody else, and it's just like, this is so clear. Do you not understand this? How do you not understand this? Here, A, B, and C. Do you see how they connect? I even have a chart. And yet, we understand, first of all, if they're not getting it, if they're looking at it and going, yeah, I'm not interested in what you and your Bible have to say, however they express that, their mind is fundamentally on things of man instead of things of God. Flip the coin over. Why is that? Is that because you are not expressing things clearly enough and you need to break it down into third grade level English? No. Reason they're not understanding is because it is, in that regard, withheld from them. The Lord has to be the one, through the power of his Spirit, who then brings light. So there's my responsibility to teach, but ultimately understanding that it is the Holy Spirit who brings understanding. Linda.
think it's interesting too, that they knew they didn't understand,
Mm-hmm.
but they were afraid to ask.
Yeah, and
You know, I wondered, you know, does that go back to Peter's being rebuked? That they don't want to call that themselves?
perhaps.
Or is it that they don't really want to, they don't want to know what
Mhm.
the answer is going to be because they're suspecting that they're not going to like it? I mean,
Yeah, and I think that second piece may be a little bit closer to the equation, because what's going on in these three passages is I am very, 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 very interested in what the kingdom has for me. And whenever Jesus starts talking about, well, actually, let's start talking in categories of death and suffering and taking up crosses and following me to places of execution, that's where they kind of go, I'm not sure I really like where this conversation is going. Could we go back to the kingdom part? You are the Christ, you're the Messiah, you're the one who is going to establish and reign. But they don't really like hearing the cost that might incur.
I like.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, isn't that an interesting feature? In all three, let's put it this way. Here's Jesus who is pouring out his heart of this is what's going to happen to me, and it is objectively horrific. This is maybe a loose parallel would be, hey guys, I just came back from the doctor and I've got stage 4 glioblastoma in my brain, and they said it's inoperable. And you go, ooh, that's rough. Anyway, so I got this problem with my house and it's leaking in the roof, and it's going to cost at least $500 to get it replaced. Can you believe it? Like that's kind of the category of what the disciples are doing here.
Tim,
Uh-huh.
I think we should look at human beings' nature, though. This is the nature of us.
Very good.
When we have really, really bad news put before us and we don't see it, we don't see it for a reason. Like God, first of all, God knows we're not really prepared to understand that yet. And I think, this has happened to me where I have had bad news that I was obvious probably to anybody else in the room but me. But I wasn't prepared to understand it.
Yeah, they definitely were not prepared to understand that, which does speak to their understanding where their hearts were oriented, and even the fact that Jesus' response is, "You're setting your mind on not on God's interest, but on man's." That's hitting on what is the problem in Peter's heart, and by extension, the other disciples. Because it talks about how he looked at the other disciples. What that indicates is Peter's the spokesman, and all the other disciples are like,
Yeah.
yeah.
But he's been teaching them for all this time
Yeah.
about their faith. And maybe they're at that point where they're thinking they just need to have faith because they have a picture in their head that's always been there about what they thought it was going to be like, that he was going to come with an army. And he was gonna
So they had those ideas, and some of them were grounded in Old Testament teaching, but their ideas was Messiah comes, Messiah conquers, we reign, we get loot, if I could put it crassly.
And say we get loot, maybe the others are not.
Well, when they talk about we want to be the greatest in the kingdom, why do you want to be the greatest in the kingdom? It's all the benefits that come to me.
Okay.
So let's keep plowing through here. A few more observations. Discipleship, verse 34, means death to self. Okay, so can I be a disciple of Jesus Christ and not be putting self to death daily? Notice also Jesus doesn't just say this to the 12 disciples, but he summons the crowd. He tells more broadly, okay, you guys, you're following me. Let me tell you what it means to follow me. You need to be willing to lose your life for the gospel. And we could even take that and think about that, turn it over. What does it mean to lose your life for the gospel? Like just this past week, I saw one of the videos out of Nigeria where Islamists are going in and slaughtering villages. And you just see as hundreds of people are running from the village as you hear gunshots in the background. And we look at that and we say, well, that's not really our experience in the United States. And certainly we pray for our brothers and sisters in Nigeria who are suffering the ultimate cost. And yet nobody's come and said, renounce your faith or I'm going to kill you. So how then does it look for us here today, here, Eastern North Carolina, to lose our life for the gospel? Shelley.
It looks like Charlie Kirk.
Good. Yeah.
He lost
Let's-
his life for telling the truth.
Mm-hmm. Let's even take that and expand that. Let's say that hadn't happened. Let's say Charlie Kirk lived and expended his life sharing the gospel, speaking truth. Is there a sense in which he has lost his life for the gospel? Yeah. Instead of like, here's a stick of dynamite that's exploded for, whatever purpose, it's more like here's a candle that is expending itself, and over time it is burning itself out to light up this particular room. And so when that candle ultimately goes out, you can look at it and say, well, that candle in a sense died to give light to this room. And so in a very similar way, when you live your life, if you're thinking in terms of losing my life means someone comes up to me, sticks a gun in my face and says, do you renounce Christ? And I say no, and then I step into glory. Okay, well, that's true. But if that never happens, and I think for most of us, that probably will not. If you're saying day after day, I'm going to wake up, get up, and serve the Lord and expend my life on pleasing God, guess what? You
We're
are giving
dying
up
to
your
self.
life for the gospel. You're dying to self for the sake of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to take what Jesus is saying and make that artificially narrow. Being a disciple of Jesus Christ is better than the whole world. Verse 36. So dying for Jesus is better than living and having the entire world at your disposal.
What chapter are we in?
Chapter 8 still. We're just about to jump to chapter 9. Then we could make the observation from verse 38. If you're a disciple of Jesus Christ, you're not ashamed of his truth because you're not one of the adulterous and sinful generation. So let's take a look at chapter 9. So there we have a parallel story. Again, what are some observations that we could make from verse 30 to 37, chapter 9? Again, just throw them out. Some of them may overlap a little bit. Ask questions of the text, kind of turn it over. Why is this significant? Why is this here?
I don't understand why he was so explicitly said that he was going to be delivered into the hands of men and killed. And after 3 days, he will rise. And they didn't say anything. They were afraid to ask him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think I would be the kind of person who would ask some clarifying questions
Okay.
at that point. I'm wondering why they didn't. Yeah.
Okay.
Embarrassed in front of the rest of the apostles, that maybe they're feeling like the only one that doesn't get it.
Hmm?
Like maybe
Could be.
my faith, maybe I shouldn't be here after all because I'm not seeing it.
It could be. Could be possibly looking at how they respond, because what do they really love? They love glory, not suffering. Start talking about suffering, I start getting uncomfortable and really not interested.
Yeah,
So-
I didn't sign up for that
Yeah.
story. I want this story. I
Can,
want the we win.
can we do the partial sanctification program, the one where we just walk into glory and they say, here you go?
But I've also seen, sorry, like if you go to the doctor with your older parents and they are being told very plainly, there is no cure. This is what we're going to do, but you're not going to live. I've been surprised at how difficult it is for people to actually hear the truth stated very plainly, directly to their face, and yet they impartially perceive
Mm-hmm.
what was said.
Yeah. there's a perception that is based, again, we could say it's understandable, but there's a perception based on what you want to believe, which is exactly what the disciples are doing. I don't want to believe that following Jesus could be that costly.
Or maybe they figured he was speaking allegorically or symbolically.
Yeah, somehow I'm going to reframe what he's saying so it doesn't mean what he's clearly saying. Teresa.
If we go back and look at what we think they actually believed, they believed that the Messiah was going to be an earthly Messiah.
Uh-huh.
This did not fit their belief. And so it was calling into question what they were believing in, their faith. And so
Yeah.
if they didn't see the Messiah as an earthly, I mean, you're going to kill that's not what we believe. That's not what our faith is in.
Mm-hmm.
So I think possibly they didn't really know where to go with that.
Yeah. The passages about the suffering Messiah, what do we do with those? Not really sure. Typological passages that speak to the suffering of Jesus, what do we do with those? Not really sure. But what's very clear is Zechariah 10, Zechariah 8, Micah 6. Like, what's supposed to happen here? It's going to be great. He's going to trot on the heads of Romans, crush their heads, and he's going to establish his kingdom. Scott.
I have a simpler thought.
Mm-hmm.
They were just totally consumed with who was the greatest. Didn't even get what was going on around them.
Yeah. It's funny how having a heaping dose of self right in the middle will distort everything you believe about everything that God has revealed. Linda.
I also think it's inherent, maybe it's my problem, but in thinking that I'm different. That's what's gonna happen to everybody.
Certainly, I would not be like the disciples, right? Yes. Good.
You guys.
Uh-huh. I hope everybody else in this class is paying attention, but that would not be me. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's where it's really helpful. If we look at biblical characters and we go, I don't understand how they could possibly be that stupid. I mean, whether we're talking about the Israelites in the wilderness or we're talking about disciples today, if we just go, clearly they're a different class of humanity than me. We're not really understanding what's going on in the story. Because I guarantee you, somehow, some way, what happens is done with the class, you leave, you go out to lunch, and somehow, in some way, you play out this exact same scenario. Somehow. So let's take a few more observations here. So Jesus teaches the disciples are afraid. What is Jesus' path to greatness? It is being a servant. Very counter to what they were prone to think. Why does he emphasize a child? You ever think about that? Why does he bring the child in?
Because clearly this teaches you baptize your infants.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
No, sorry, that's not what that teaches. Okay. Can a child, a little child that sits on your lap, do they have anything to give to you? If I have, one of the, Royal Praetorian Guard, or I have someone who has the ear of Caesar, that's the person I want to have because that person can bring me greater glory. So I want to serve them. I want to genuflect before them. I want them to just think really, really well of me because they can give me what I want. A child can't do that. So when Jesus takes a child and says, whoever receives a child like this in my name, a person who is taking a child, serving, loving. And remember, this is first century Judaism. They didn't have the kind of nostalgic enthusiasm about children. Children were, in this era, basically a tool that you were then able to use to ensure that you had a happy life when you got old. So from the youngest, you're just trying to keep your kids alive. Probably about half of them are going to die before they reach adulthood. So you're not even sure they're going to make it. And they're just kind of there. They don't really have a whole lot that they can offer. Jesus says, you need to receive a child like this. By doing so, you receive me. Building off of the being a servant of all. Let's take a look at the third event. verses 32 to 45. And same thing here. Let's make a couple initial observations and then take a look at some of the other questions here. So more explicit teaching, amazed and afraid, probably because of some of the same things that we've been talking about. James and John, let's think about this. James and John come to Jesus. Do they desire the place in the kingdom because they want to be close to Christ? Is that what's driving them?
No, their mother was driving them.
Okay, Mom. Okay.
You do it.
Okay. Need to advance yourself. So they are desiring self-advancement apart from Christ-likeness. Just think about that. Is it wrong to say, Lord, the desire of my soul would be, if it is possible, somehow, if I could be the one who is the closest to you in eternity, that would bring me the greatest joy. Is there anything wrong with desiring that? Wanting to be close to the Lord in eternity? No. Is that what James and John are doing?
No.
No. Why do they want to be close to Jesus? They want Jesus as a means to an end.
Power position.
Yep. If I am at Jesus' left hand or right hand, he is a means to get me what I really want, which is self-glory. They're not wanting to be close to him for him. So there's a degree of reward in terms of proximity to Christ. We could spend a lot of time talking about that. But being like Christ in glory requires being like him in life. The one who's most like Christ in life will be the most like him in eternity, in glory, and have greatest degree of reward in eternity. Okay. So they wanted the benefits of being like Christ in glory without the being like Christ in life, which means suffering and death. We have the other 10 who are angry. Are they righteously angry because how dare you use the Lord of glory as a means to an end? Now, why are they angry? You guys thought of it first. I was still crafting my elevator speech. They wanted to be the greatest as well. The world, verse 42, the world views greatness as, what can I extract from you for me? What does Jesus say greatness is? Greatness is saying, what do I have that I can use to serve you? And then he uses himself as an illustration. Yeah, you're to be a servant. You're to be a slave to all. You're to be a slave in life. And Jesus, the greatest, is going to take it to the furthest extreme. He's not just going to be a servant in life. He is going to be a servant in death. So Jesus, the greatest, is going to die like a slave. So a bunch of observations from that text there. We could just make the observation. How do we know that we're being good servants? And I think one of the best ways you can think about this is, okay, well, how then do you respond when someone treats you like a servant? I will serve you as long as you appreciate what I give you. Okay, great. How about when they don't appreciate it? How do you do then? Well, I don't like that because they're treating me like a servant. Is that what I am in this house? I'm just everybody's servant? Yeah, that's kind of what Jesus said. I don't like that. Okay, well, let's go back to the text. What does Jesus expect from you? To be a servant of all, to be a slave of all.
So do you have any recommendations for those of us that are servants to be able to look to Christ for receiving, that feeling that we're looking for, if we're not gonna get it. Let's say you are the servant in your house and you're doing everything for everybody and your family didn't appreciate you. How are you supposed to act? Well, you're supposed to be being a servant. So I get that you're not supposed to be upset about that position, but how do you look forward to that without having bad feelings about not being appreciated?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And there's a lot that we could develop in that question.
Because don't we all want to be appreciated ultimately in some way, just like they wanted position. That's a human nature thing. So what do you do?
Yeah, so there's a couple categories there. First of all, let's take kids. This is a really easy, relatively safe topic. If my kids don't appreciate the service that I am giving them, what should my response then be? If it's just, on one level, it should be, it is my joy to serve because I'm not seeking my reward from my children. I'm seeking my reward from my Savior. There's another aspect of it. If I love my children, what does that mean? It means I want them to look like Jesus. What does looking like Jesus mean? It means that when they see someone serving them, they respond with thankfulness. And so if I see a selfishness, is there an appropriate sorrow that I should experience over that? Yes. However, is it a sorrow because I worked so hard and nobody appreciates me? No, it's okay. Whether they appreciate me or not, my reward is with the Lord, and it is far, 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 far better than anything that they can give me. However, hand in hand with that, my love for you means that I want you to become like Jesus Christ. So I want to teach you and instruct you and discipline you so that you display Christ. A big part of what you're hitting on there is our perspective tends to be very bound up with the priorities of the world. The clearer and clearer we see what Jesus is talking about here, what is the way to be great? It is to be a servant. If we really understood that, we would be going, I don't care how you respond. The joy of my heart is that I get to serve, because do you know what? In just a couple short years, I'm going to be dead. And then I'm going to be in the presence of Jesus Christ, enjoying, as he says, you were faithful to me in all those points, and you were tempted to be allured by the applause and approval of man, but you did what was right for me. And that's going to translate into, in the intermediate state, greater joy, glory at the judgment when what you did is revealed before all. They will be able to see, yes, indeed, that was what Christ approved of, and he is rewarding that appropriately. And then in the eternal state, in the new heavens and the new earth, that then has a whole bunch of implications for what are you going to be doing in eternity, because you demonstrated faithfulness in life. So you get more in eternity to glorify God with. So basically, the question you're asking, we could go on for several hours, and we're for time. I'm sorry, but I hope that at least gives a little bit of a flavor of where the answer is at. Next question: how does this passage develop related biblical themes? We could talk about greatness through being a servant. As we look in the Old Testament, we see what is one of God's highest commendations. It's that this is my servant. This is my servant Abraham. This is my servant Isaac. This is my servant. We see the picture in Joseph as he serves and then receives greatness. We see God referring to Moses as his servant. Samuel, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. We see this theme in Luke, in Paul. that the one who is the least and who's the servant will be exalted. Whoever exalts himself will be abased. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Luke 14:11. In Hebrews, here are these individuals who died in faith, of whom the world was not worthy. And yet they were faithful because, like Moses, they sought the reward. Is there, next question, relevant historical context? There's a few historical items we could look at. The Sanhedrin didn't have the power of execution. The Romans did by execution, so that's what Jesus is talking about, being handed over to the Romans, and that's the implications of being handed over to the Romans. What does it mean to take up your cross and follow Jesus? And we have romanticized the cross in many ways such that it is something that is attractive in a sense to us. Whereas if you go back to the first century, you did not talk about crucifixion in polite company. And it's been noted by historians that the cross only became popular as a symbol of the Christian faith only after everybody who had actually seen a crucifixion had died off. It would be something that if you had seen it, there would be almost a nauseating reflex of a cross, because you knew what it was like to watch a person die for days screaming on a cross. There's nothing attractive about it. We could also look at what does it mean to be a servant or a slave back then. In effect, being a slave means you are at the will of master. You don't have a will of your own. You serve the master and his will. Next question, how do these passages contribute or relate to systematic theology? And I'm just going to highlight a few because I want to get to some of the application pieces. From theology proper, we could see God has frequently a very different set of interests than man. So our interests are in what is God's interests? What does he desire from us? Hamartiology, what is man's desire? It's for self-advancement rather than service. We see this in our own lives every single day. Christology, Jesus Christ, the God-man, how did he demonstrate greatness? Through being a servant, and it is through his service that then God highly exalts him. Soteriology, there's an emphasis on teaching in the midst of understanding by disciples. So what does that practically imply? As we're teaching people, people are going to misunderstand. And so what do? We continue giving them doctrinal truth. Soteriology also teaches us the nature of discipleship is not optional. It's not, I'm saved, maybe I'll be a disciple now and start following Jesus. That's not optional. And then eschatology, there's a reward of closeness to Christ in eternity to those who are most conformed to him in life. And we see that when Jesus says, as James and John say, can we be at your left hand and your right hand? Jesus doesn't go, guys, nobody gets that. What does he say? Yeah, 2 people get it. Out of all of human history, there are 2 people who will get to stand at my left hand and my right hand, but that is given by the Father. And then let's come to the last questions there. So get narrative, good questions to ask are, if I were in that situation, what would come out of my soul? If I were the disciples and I was in that situation, what would my desires be?
I just don't think we can answer that question. Because
Just gonna put yourself in there.
if you think that you know how you're gonna respond to a given situation until you're in it, and then it's shockingly apparent how sinful you really are when that sin comes out and the pressure's on.
Okay, well,
You just don't, I think it's really hard to put yourself in a situation like that
Okay.
mentally.
So one way that I think that they clearly were confused.
Mhm.
What they were hearing didn't match what they thought they already knew. So I kind of think that we wouldn't be any different.
Okay.
That we would be just as confused about making sense of what I'm hearing and what I think I know. That just kind of
Mhm.
this coordinate way that we have when.
Let's take that. And both of those answers, I think, hit on something really helpful here. Okay, we look at it and we look at it knowing the whole story. So it's, in one sense, it's difficult to say, if Jesus said, I'm going to be crucified, it's difficult for us to say, well, what do you mean? Because we know what it means. Do we ever, though, see clear scriptural teaching and go, I'm not sure I really like that? Let's take some popular ones. We're all good complementarians. Wife, submit to your husband. Does that mean when I disagree with him or when I agree with him? Because I'm really willing to submit as long as he's not dumb. I mean, do we ever have circumstances where we can look at scripture and we can see what it clearly teaches and we think, okay, then this crystal clear doctrinal apostolic teaching, let me put it in my own life. Let's put that back. Do we ever do that?
Oh, yeah, all the
Yes.
time. God didn't really mean to die to yourself. God didn't really mean to do this.
God would not mind if I just had to have some me time. And so, yeah, I blew up, but God would understand that because reasons. Now, the idea of serving them constantly, do you know how draining they are? Do you know how draining he is? Well, let's go back. How are the disciples responding when they're told, here's doctrinal truth that you don't like? And we respond in very similar ways. Let's actually flip that around. Let's say, we can think this way, if you were in Jesus' place and you're standing there and you're saying, guys, with tears in my eyes, here is what's going to happen to me. It is going to be horrible. I am essentially going to be butchered to death over 6 hours, more than that, actually. So I want you to know so that you are prepared. And their response is, looking at the shiny things, kicking the dirt, looking at the bugs. Oh, by the way, Jesus, I really, really want to be the greatest in your kingdom. Okay. So just try to put yourself in that situation. What do you think would come out of your soul? Sadness? I think with me, it would be a lot more than sadness.
Like, maybe, is there something I can do to stop this? Because it doesn't match with what I want.
Okay. Desire to stop it, certainly. What would your reaction be towards the disciples?
Bacon.
Yeah, anger. Maybe hurt.
In defense of the disciples and things like Daniel 7 and some of the other
Mhm.
verses you mentioned, they were coming from a different perspective.
Mhm.
They were making,
sure.
they were making a transition right here.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
a
they're
lot of
not-
new stuff added to the Old Testament and clarification
Mm-hmm.
is beginning to set in.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's definitely clarification that they need because they're not seeing truth correctly because their interests are on themselves, not on God. But really, what would your response be if you're pouring yourself out to somebody and their response is basically, I don't care. All I care about is me? I think probably the most pronounced reaction would be anger and hurt. I just can't believe after all I've done for you guys, this is how you would treat me. I think, knowing me, I think that's what I would be most tempted to respond with. Either just like a throttling, do you guys not understand what I just said to you? Or just, I just can't believe. I've served you guys for, we're talking years now. And this is how you treat me. How does Jesus respond? What is the second question there? What is God accomplishing in this narrative? He's showing what? What does true greatness look like? Service. Okay, so if I know that's what Jesus is accomplishing in this passage, in these three passages, then what ought to be the response of my heart when, let's take that same illustration, I pour myself out for somebody and they respond in a way that is incredibly self-centered? What ought to be coming out of my heart? Hint, take a look at the text. What comes out of Jesus' heart? What does he do?
He teaches them.
Yeah.
Or he explains to them.
He serves and he teaches. I mean, the level of patience here is incredible. Lord, that would not be what comes out of my heart. Yet that's what comes out of Jesus' heart. Here they are treating him like dirt to get to their own goals. And Jesus says, all right, here is a teachable moment. And what comes out of his heart is instruction. Loving instruction to continue to shape their thinking to make them more like him. What ought to come out of my heart? It ought to be. It ought to be. It's not, but it ought to be that when somebody treats me poorly, what comes out of my heart is maybe this is an opportunity where I could encourage them with truth, where I could serve them in love, where I could demonstrate Christ's likeness in such a way that they go, oh, I want to be like Christ, just like that.
Tim, to connect, and you have connected that in this passage, that there is still an eschatological expectation of glory. But the cross is how Christ gets to that glory.
Yeah. Which that informs.
So that's not like, you're not being a doormat. You're not saying service as a doormat, but service as the pathway to the greatness of the kingdom.
Yeah. I mean, in one sense, that's treating doormats really, really well, because slaves are worse than doormats. And yet there's I am serving out of love for you, which means, what is my goal for you? It's not to be this subservient groveler who just does everything I'm serving you with a goal in mind, to help you be more like Jesus Christ. And that's always the pylon that's sunk into bedrock that is governing every interaction we ought to have with other people. I'm interacting with you, serving you, not because, I'm just groveling around trying to do whatever, but because I have no self-esteem or something like that. Totally different category. I want to serve you because I want you to be more like Jesus, because A, that's the path of glory to the kingdom. B, to the extent that you become more like Jesus, to that extent, I get to rejoice in you when you get to glory, which means I experience an even greater joy as I look at the joy that you're experiencing. That's why Jonathan Edwards could describe heaven as a world of love. It's not just that you're looking at, here's my own happiness. You're looking at everybody else's happiness, and you're gaining happiness through their happiness. That radically changes how we approach suffering as well. We're thinking like this, and we're responding like Jesus would have us to when Jesus starts talking about suffering and service and being the least of all. It ought to be that our hearts respond with, yes, Lord, that's what I want, because in that I get to image what you're like. So then, last question. How does that then inform how I respond now in present circumstances? And we could ask questions like, okay, well, how am I seeking to be served? How am I expecting my spouse to serve me? How am I expecting my church to serve me? mean, I'm coming there. I pay dues every week. They ought to be serving me somehow, right? How should my children serve me? How should my work serve me? Do they not see how much I'm doing for them? Another question. How do I feel when I get treated like a servant? Really, really good metric to analyze this question is, does the thought or the words, "nobody appreciates me," ever come across your lips? If that does, that ought to be, okay, red flag, there's something wrong here. We could ask the question, where do I tend to get hurt? If you've been in the fundamentals training class, you know what I'm about to say. There's a really, really hard to swallow pill. Hurt is almost always, if not always, a way to say, I deserve better than what you just gave me. And now I'm going to respond in hurt. At the bottom of hurt, in that sense, is always the element of self-love. Just to be clear, we're not talking about sorrow over watching someone in sin. We're not talking about grief of seeing a fallen word. We're talking about, I deserve better, and you treated me like this. I am so hurt. That's a really tough one for all of us. But that's what the operating system is. When people treat me poorly, is my immediate impulse to think, how can I serve them by encouraging them to be better disciples of Jesus Christ? Or is it, well, I need to establish my own greatness and show them how great I am? Could ask the question, how can I expend my life for the gospel? You know, if I'm thinking about myself and my interests all day long, I'm totally missing the point, and I'm just like the disciples. If I'm thinking about him and his interests, and I'm trying to live my life accordingly, that's when I'm seeing things correctly. And maybe lastly, is my all-consuming desire to be a good disciple of Jesus Christ, even when that means putting self to death? Am I seeking to serve and love because I'm consumed with the need to be like Jesus Christ, and I'm looking towards eternity, and that's what's gripped my imagination, my heart, my affections? Or is it the things of this world? And so those are questions that we can ask that, frankly, are uncomfortable to ask and probably are best asked alone in the solitude of your own soul. And then say, so in this respect, am I more like the disciples or am I more like Jesus in my functional everyday living? Any other questions or observations? We've got 1 or 2 more minutes, and we'll go ahead and land the plane. But any other thoughts? All right. Well, let's go ahead and pray. Again, great interaction. Next week, starting to look at parables. How do we understand those? And we'll work through a couple passages of those.